Tonight we're going in depth on the last week of the 2025 legislative session, where we expect state representatives and state senators will spend much of their last days of the session overriding some of Governor Kevin Stitt's vetoes. The budget is complete, and Governor Stitt says he will not veto the budget this year. For the most part, many of the bills that have passed have been signed into law and will take effect in either July or November. But there's about, according to our count, around 45 bills, some of which received overwhelming bipartisan support, that were vetoed for various reasons. Because of the bipartisan support, the 2/3 votes needed in each chamber already got the bill passed the first time around, and it is expected that vote count will be there to override some of these bills when another vote is taken. One of the biggest vetoes came within just the past week. Governor Kevin Stitt vetoed a bill renewing the State Board of Cosmetology's authority through 2028. The governor says the board as we know it needs to change and be more efficient and possibly be moved under a state agency. With 2 weeks left in session when that veto happened, there was no way to just redo the entire hair care and beauty industry in our state, and so many barbers, stylists, and cosmetologists across the state are pleading for this veto to be overridden, claiming anyone who goes to Walmart and buys scissors would be allowed to open up their own unregulated barber shops with no safety or cleanliness standards.
So the state board, what they do for us is they regulate us as a school, because a lot of these items that we do could cause major health impacts to the general population. You don't want anyone doing your straight razor shave that just walked in off the street today with a scalpel, or your chemical peel, or maybe you want highlights. Well, if they just started today and they don't know the proper safety training and protocol, you may end up just with no hair.
Some barbers and stylists we spoke to say yes, the board can be overwhelming, and mine even says all the time it is downright oppressive, but reform needs to be better than this. Governor Kevin Stitt vetoed a bill renewing the board that oversees and regulates funeral homes. The governor says the board has created a monopoly on funeral expenses that has gouged people trying to bury their loved ones. The board handles things like inspections, financial oversight, and complaints, and making sure funeral homes are acting in the highest ethical and professional standards. Joseph Moore is the president of the Moore and Fitzgerald Funeral Homes, and he tells Fox 23 he's disappointed with the governor's veto and is unsure what the industry might look like without any regulation.
It's very scary, because the thought of anybody just being able to perform those functions without any, without proper credentialing, education, oversight, to make sure they're professional and ethical people is a very scary job, because we don't want any family to have to face the consequences of it being treated improperly.
In his veto message, Governor Stitt said in part, quote, before granting another sunset extension, the legislature should seriously evaluate where this board belongs and what its core duties should be. Until the funeral board becomes more accountable and responsive to legislative oversight, its continuation should not be rubber stamped. One of the early vetoes of an overwhelmingly bipartisan bill was that involving making insurance companies be required to cover the cost of certain mammograms. The veto of House Bill 1389 was confusing to lawmakers in both parties, because just 2 years earlier, Stitt signed a bill requiring insurance companies to cover the cost of certain mammograms. This bill was cleaning up that language to include more machines that rural Oklahomans have access to if they can't drive into the cities with more advanced technology. Stitt said this update to the bill he signed 2 years ago would have increased the cost of health insurance, to which Tulsa Democrat Melissa Provenzano, who wrote the bill and is battling breast cancer herself this session, said was baffling.
Insurance companies are doing just fine, and I think that rang a little weak with me, especially when you consider that the upfront investment of paying for a diagnostic mammogram means early detection.
Democrats accused Stitt of vetoing the bill simply because it was written by a Democrat, but we should note it was co-authored by a Republican in the state Senate. Supporters in both chambers say insurance companies can either pay for cheaper early detection methods, or they can shell out even more money for breast cancer treatments once they have advanced and spread in a patient. Law enforcement and Oklahoma tribes are hoping a veto that seemed less about law enforcement and more as another chapter in the saga of fighting between Governor Stitt and the tribes will be overridden this week. The bill updates what is known as Ida's Law. It would have removed a requirement that the State Bureau of Investigation create an office to look into missing and murdered indigenous people using federal funds. The bill that was vetoed would have actually taken away the federal funding requirement and allow us OSBI to use more state funds to help solve those types of cases involving tribal citizens.
A law called Ida's Law, which adds resources so that the state and the tribes can work together on addressing situations where, again, an indigenous person goes missing.
In his veto message, and despite signing a law in 2021 creating the office within OSBI dedicated to missing and murdered Indigenous people, Stitt said justice and the resources behind it should be colorblind and blind to race. He says all missing and murdered people matter. Last year, Oklahoma ranked second in the nation for the number of missing and murdered Indigenous people. And the governor also vetoed a bill last week the banking industry and advocates for senior citizens were working on together to prevent scammers from using cryptocurrency. Senate Bill 1083 addresses cryptocurrency ATMs that are already popping up across the state, including here in the Tulsa Metro. Stitt vetoed it, saying crypto ATMs should be regulated like other ATMs and called it mirroring liberal regulations like what's already in place in New York and California. Supporters of the bill say when it comes to crypto, there are no consumer protections or even warnings right now in the state, and putting a basic framework protects consumers now while laying a path for crypto to be used like cash in the future. Senior citizens groups who have been dealing with a large number of crypto scams involving the elderly supported the bill, saying it helped prevent grandma from getting scammed. Now, of course, out of around 45 bills, we only touched on a few high-profile ones we've covered this session so far. We will note all veto overrides here on this program during this last week of session. Also on Tuesday, the state Senate won't hear any veto overrides at all. They'll be approving executive nominations instead when it comes to approving new members of boards such as the state school board.